Telecommunications giant MTN is giving away hundreds of zero-rated educational and health websites. Now, this is to ensure access to educational resources for less privileged pupils during the lockdown. This amongst other things. Now, the operator has so far zero-rated over 470 URLs, which were approved by government, with more being added each day. But for more, of course, to discuss this, I'm joined by MTN Corporate Affairs Executive, that's Ms. Jackie O'Sullivan. Thank you so much, Mr. O'Sullivan, for your time, and welcome to eNCA. Quite an interesting initiative here, which I think will benefit a majority of pupils, particularly at this time. As we know, the President had called for closures of schools, so it means they will be at home, but still have to continue with learning. How are you particularly intervening and assisting here?
Thanks, Camilo. You know, at the start of the lockdown, all the operators started getting flooded with requests for zero rating. And this is just such a critical requirement, as you pointed out at at this time. So we, rather than dealing with them on an individual basis, the directors collaborated with the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Telecommunication and Digital Services, and a project management office has been formed. So what this allows is that every request for zero rating gets screened through that project management office. And then once we're sure that the DBE are comfortable with the content on those sites, we then zero rate them. So it's a process. It's fairly arduous, but we're doing as many as we can each week. So obviously our objective is to try and keep as many of our learners and our students connected. So initially we prioritized by the PMO's request. We prioritized universities and TVET. All of those are now zero rated. And then we've now been asked to prioritize schools. So that's really where the focus is now, to try and make sure that teachers can still stay in touch with their learners, even in these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, and I assume that also is to bridge the gap between the digital divide that we see so much in our country. This in previously disadvantaged communities, or communities that don't have necessarily the clear connectivity that they would need to obviously access a particular website or even the internet for that matter. But over and above this, I mean, how do you also ensure that while those zero-rated websites are accessed, also devices are equally accessed so that they can then access the websites?
Absolutely, Tamila. It's a very valid point. The issue really is that MTN has managed to get 96% of the country covered with 4G, but the priority really still remains getting those smart devices into people's hands. And that really has been a huge push to try and identify those kinds of devices that we can at least look at a low-cost version of them, to be able to make sure that people are connected, because connectivity is obviously the first step. And while the allocation of the temporary spectrum has been a very powerful move by government to help us, to enable us, we still need to get devices into the hands of South Africans. And that's that digital divide. MTN has invested heavily in building computers. And the frustration, obviously, is that those centers are now closed. So what it has done is certainly put a very strong light on the need to look at how we can bridge that digital divide in the form of devices, and really looking at how we can make those devices more affordable, how we can bring more affordable devices into the country, and looking always at where there is development happening in the country of new devices that can actually serve this, in addition to the many thousands that have been distributed by MTN and other operators.
Right. Let's then talk about, education or rather education when it comes to using and utilizing the websites and, the devices, Ms. O'Sullivan, because, I mean, you can attest to this, that not all, public schools or even basic education schools in most communities have access to computers, or at least did before the lockdown. And even some that go to university still have to learn, the basic, rules of using a computer. They have to align to Microsoft Word or Excel and so forth. How do you ensure that even though they do have access to these devices and these websites, they also know how to accurately utilize them and use them so that they can still stay up to date with their work?
Well, we have partnered very closely with the Department of Basic Education and Social Services around the education and use of technology in the years leading up to this. So we've always been very active in that space. But really is actually getting the partnerships, because we've been able to go in and actually work with the teachers, with the principal and make sure that that learning has been happening. So our experience has been that the learners in the school environments are really quite skilled in able to access the content. So being able to, first of all, make sure the content is there, which we've provided through our website, all of the disciplines is there. But then once they have the content, being able to make sure that they can use the device. The fact that the actual computer literacy we're seeing in the schools that we support has actually been really quite good. And a great push by teachers in those fields of IT and computer-aided technology and, IT, and as well as the usual subjects. So we've certainly seen an improvement in the recent past, and it's clearly a big focus for teachers.
Yeah, you mentioned their content, and I'm curious to know if you're at liberty at this point to share with us exactly what kind of educational and health, content that learners and pupils can find on the websites.
Absolutely. So on the mtn.co.za URL, you'll find a section called Open Time, and in Open Time, you'll find the full list of all the URLs. So there's a heavy focus on education because obviously that's the core pressure right now. From a health perspective, we've got news and information sites that give you information about the pandemic. Then on the other side, we've got all of the sites that government needs to use in terms of reporting, tracking and tracing, the field workers that are out on the ground. We've supported them with tablets and devices, but now they can actually then load the information that will be zero-rated. And then from an education perspective, we've looked at the full scale from grade 1 all the way up to matric. And what we've done is we've identified partners that we've worked with. So a higher end, so for instance, we've got a number, in fact, of amazing students that have completely finished their maths, physics, CAT, and IT curriculum for the year using the Siavula platform, which MTN has sponsored for matriculants for the whole year. So that is open. Then we have, for instance, another very good site, which is called To Enable, and that contains all of the other educational requirements in the primary space and into the early part of high school. So really making sure we've got the right partners with us, and obviously guided by the project management office, we've been able to provide a huge volume of content. So really what I'd like to do is encourage people to go to mtn.co.za and make sure that you're fully aware of what sites are available to you, and make sure you're using those zero-rated sites. You shouldn't be needing to use your own data to access this educational content.
And how long will the content be, on the website for? How long will also this initiative run for? Will it be just for the duration of the lockdown, or are we seeing more of it long-term, even post-lockdown?
So MTN has always zero-rated websites, but prior to the lockdown, we did strike an agreement with the Competition Commission that specifically looked at zero-rating sites up to 500 sites to a maximum of 500 meg. This, however, is operating outside of that agreement with the Competition Commission. We are extending beyond the 500, and really we're going to continue offering this access as long as South Africa requires in terms of this pandemic situation. We have the agreement in place. Once the situation stabilizes, we'll be able to go back to that agreement. But really what we're doing now is actually superseding that agreement, and we'll just keep adding those websites as many as needed to try and make sure we can bridge this gap for so many people, not just learners.
Well, Jackie O'Sullivan, Corporate Affairs Executive at MTN, thank you for talking to us.